Welcome back to the Talking Archive. I'm Josh Jacobs, and our conversation continues with radio personality and program director Chuck Southcott.
One of my favorite people would come by on occasion, and that's Lou Rawls. He was just I used to call him Sweet Lou, just a good guy. And I loved his comment on working. We were talking one time, and he said, one thing I don't approve of. And I said, what's that? He said, guys dressing up and dressing in street clothes to entertain. No, you got to wear your best. He did a whole thing on this grovelly look that he did not approve of. He said, no, you put on a tux, or at least a darn good suit.
Well, the song Sweet Soul Music by Arthur Conley has the line, "Spotlight on Lou Rawls, y'all. Oh, don't he look gorgeous, y'all?" So that's probably where he got it from, maybe, or maybe you heard that part of the
The only guy who ever made me nervous, oddly enough, was Merv Griffin. I had him in there for an hour, and I couldn't figure out. It took me a couple of days to figure out why it was he made me nervous. And I've interviewed a lot of people who were big names, but he made me nervous. Finally, I remembered that he was one of the best interviewers ever on television. And here I was trying to interview the best interviewer. And that's what made me nervous.
Wow.
Because I couldn't lick his boots. I knew it.
Somebody told me a couple of years ago that the job for The Tonight Show back in 1962, after Jack Parr retired from it or quit, it was between Johnny Carson and Merv Griffin.
Well, Merv did okay.
Yeah, he did. He was on for like 30 years in daytime television. And his format, it's funny, it was Merv Griffin and Mike Douglas were the two big names in daytime TV, and they both pretty much had the same format. You know, had the singing at the beginning and then the interviews with guests afterwards. Although what was interesting is that Mike Douglas brought on the more controversial figures oftentimes and set them with people who oftentimes disagreed with them. Like, the Toady Fields on with Gene Simmons of Kiss, and Toady Fields was totally turned off by Gene Simmons and that makeup and that, long tongue or whatever. And, and Toady Fields said to him, deep down, you're probably a nice Jewish boy. And he's like, you wouldn't know. And she says, you can't hide that hook with makeup.
She was a funny lady.
Oh,
Very
she was.
Yeah.
Did you ever get to meet her?
I never met her. I've met her by way of other people who knew her pretty well, and they spoke very highly of her. But her work, phenomenal.
Oh yeah. I mean, you've worked with so many people. You got to work with Wink Martindale. How did you get to meet the talent-born Winston Conrad Martindale, whose first claim to fame was interviewing Elvis for the first time ever on television?
Yeah, he was close and remained close to Elvis to the end. He said, however, the last time he was with him, he and his wife Sandy, he said was a little difficult. And that was because he was not the same guy. We all know why. But
yeah.
But that was kind of sad. It was great to work with him. A great sound. And a guy who crossed the barriers. He'd been a very successful top 40 and rock and roll disc jockey for years, but yet some of the stuff he was proudest of were his specials, including one on Cole Porter that he did, multi-part thing, and several of those. He worked very hard. He was a hard worker.
As a matter of fact, I remember at Music of Your Life, while most of the DJs basically did tracks on one track reel-to-reel, Wink had this giant reel-to-reel that had all these different interviews and all these different elements that he put together himself in his own home studio. And I was just like, whoa, that's just, I'm impressed. And of course it would come today in MP3 probably, but he just moved to the desert a couple of years ago, and Mark Pollock, who built the studios for Music of Your Life Radio Network initially here in L.A., built Wink's new studio out in the Palm Springs, Palm Desert area, along with a guy named Kevin Campbell, who's our other chief engineer here at the station. And people who've looked at the studio says, man, Wink has this really beautiful studio in his new home in Palm Desert.
Yeah, well, he's been our guy. Mark Pollock was very helpful to me with my studio and with Wink. So sometimes he'd say, no, I have this other job. I can't come today, but maybe tomorrow.
And Mark, the thing that can be frustrating about Mark, but it's also refreshing, is like he's raw, he's real. He doesn't pull any punches. He just says what he's thinking, which is refreshing, especially in these days and ages of PC BS.
Yeah, exactly. It comes out of left field.
It does.
No, he has quite a wit. I have a half wit. But I'm proud of it.
Oh, there we go. And then you also got, of course, Gary Owens we talked about and Jim Lang. What about, Peter Marshall? You got to hire him for the Music of Your Life Radio Network, the master of the Hollywood scores. But such a talent, I mean, on Broadway, in movies and singing, just an all-around multi-talented personality.
Yeah, he was very fond of the work of Dick Haymes, who at one time was a brother-in-law of his. Mm-hmm. And I think Haymes left his entire catalog with him.
Wow.
And if you listen to him sing, Peter sounds a lot like Dick Haymes.
Wow.
His specialty is the same as Dick's, a nice, smooth baritone and ballads.
In fact, I didn't even know
swing too, but he loved the ballads.
I didn't even know Peter Marshall. As a kid, I knew him as the host of the Hollywood Squares, and I didn't even know he was a singer until seeing the Broadway movie, no, not the Broadway movie, but the musical movie Annie from 1982, where he played the radio personality and singer Bert Healy. Is like, that's Peter Marshall. Oh my goodness!
Yeah, he appeared with a fine actress in a great musical on Broadway on his own, one of the top shows of all time. I am not, even though I did do a show called a Broadway show for several years, I did one simply called Musical for Watermark, which was a great syndication firm, and that one did very well. It was a combination of Broadway shows and, to a degree, Hollywood musicals.
And Watermark was the company that gave Casey Kasem his first syndication deal for American Top 40, and was starred by Ron Jacobs, the original program director of KHJ Boss Radio, and later Rockin' 1360 KGB, and even K-Make in Fresno, where I think Robert W. Morgan was a DJ.
Yeah, Watermark was a class operation. Just amazing. They did not send the product out on tape. It was LPs. Everything.
Wow.
Yeah. Musical, the one I did, 3 LPs a week went to the stations for 3 hours. And same with the Top 40 show. Mm-hmm. Gary Owens had a show, soundtrack of the 60s, and there was a great country syndicationist as well.
Wow.
Fine outfit, really. That was the best syndication show firm of all time for radio.
Wow. And I probably gave it a much better groove as far as the rich warmness of an LP as opposed to a reel-to-reel, is my guess.
Well, they liked it, made it easier to play for the radio stations. And they were the Cadillac outfit. In fact, when I saw my first check, I thought, "Uh-oh, this is a great union job, but this ain't going to last." It lasted about a year.
Oh,
the show lasted longer than that. We did it, I think, for 5 years.
Wow, that's just amazing. Now, as program director for several stations, how'd you guide the personalities when they needed improvement, without, of course, affecting their egos or thinking you're, talking down to them? What's your giving advice to?
Never had to.
Wow.
I hired the best.
That's great.
I was lucky in hiring the best, but they were all, we talk about what it was, and they just do it. You didn't have to tell any of these people how to sound on the air, what to look out for, what to do. They knew it all.
Wow, that's amazing. They just don't make them like that anymore, do they?
No.
Now, who are your broadcasting influences? Who inspired you? I remember you mentioned music-wise you loved Matt Monroe, but broadcasting-wise, as far as announcers were concerned, anybody in particular stand out to you growing up?
Oh, yeah. I met Magnus when I was in high school. I had a friend a couple of years older than I who had a couple of hit records named Sandy Nelson, drummer.
Mm.
And we were pretty close, and we were at Wallach's Music City one day going through some files. He just wanted to see how his current record was doing, and because here he was about 3 years older than I, and he had a hit when he was, I think, 21 or 20, and it was called Teen Beat. Then he had a few follow-ups, so we were at Wallach's Music City to see how his record was doing. I was selling. And he said, let's go across the street. They got a radio station over there. So I said, okay. And it was a kind of a crummy little house across the street, across Sunset. And it was the home of KGFJ. And the guy on the air, I'd never heard of him, was Johnny Magnus. And I thought, it's pretty good. So I remembered that, listened to him, enjoyed his work, and then I had a chance to work with him for, off and on, 20, 25 years.
Oh, yeah.
But I think Gene Norman was really my hero. Gene Norman was quite an inventive guy. He owned a record company, GNP Crescendo. He also owned and ran 2 nightclubs on the Sunset Strip. The Crescendo, the big room, and a smaller room called the Crescendo.
Wow.
So the Crescendo was the big one, and the smaller one was where the comedy acts came. And name them, all those great comedy acts from the great era, I think, of stand-up comedy. Name them.
Still in Mira.
I don't think anyone missed working for Gene Norman. Musically, he brought every great big band and jazz act in. I remember I was too young to go into the place, but I was driving Sunset Strip, and I drove by, and I was thinking, oh, that's the greatest brass section I ever heard. It came wailing out of the Crescendo into my car window, which was open, and it was the great Latin band, not Xavier Cugat, not that band, but remember Cherry Pink and Apple Blossom White, that huge hit?
Yeah.
Pres Prado.
That's right, I've heard the name before.
Yeah, a phenomenal Latin band, but he brought in all the big bands and all the great jazz trios, Brubeck, and name it. He was the impresario for jazz in Southern California for years.
That's great.
But a great disc jockey.
And did you get to meet him ever?
Oh, yeah, we got to be friends.
That's great.
Yeah, one of the people I interviewed had a party each year at his home in Beverly Hills. He was a director for MGM, and half the oldies but goodies from MGM Studios were always at his party. I remember remember the great swimmer and singer who made a lot of MGM films, all the movies where you have to swim. Esther Williams would not only sing, but she'd swim and be the love interest. Mm-hmm. But I ran into her, and it was surprising because she had a nanny that was a friend of my mother's, and every once in a while that nanny, when she was between jobs, would live with us and be my free nanny. My mom didn't have to pay her. But she was an interesting nanny, but she had worked for Esther Williams. So I meet Esther, and she said, "Oh, I've been listening to you all my life." Now, this woman was old enough to be my mother, but she listened to me all her life. That broke me up for some reason.
Esther Williams, looking her name up right now, swimmer and actress, born 1921, died 2013.
Yeah, my mother was born in 1920, so that would be... She was old enough to be my mother, see?
Yeah, there we go.
No, she was a beautiful lady and quite a career.
Oh, yeah.
There were, a lot of other people there who would show up.
In fact, she was married to Fernando Lamas for about 13 years until his passing.
Yeah, that's right.
Of course, Fernando Lamas, to most of us, is the character that Billy Crystal used to parody on NBC's Saturday Night Live. So the real Fernando Lamas, a lot of us never, well, at least people my age, never got to experience.
Yeah, I understand he was actually funnier than Fernando Lamas. By quite a wide margin.
Darling, you look marvelous.
Yeah. See, it was a good act to do. It worked out well. Well, George Sidney was the director who had those get-togethers, and if you look him up, you'll be amazed at how many motion picture musicals he directed. He was really, literally, the king of the motion picture musicals at MGM.
Wow. Let's see, George Sidney, I'm looking him up right now. He was born 1916, died in 2002. MGM, yeah. Bye Bye Birdie, Viva Las Vegas, Showboat, Annie Get Your Gun, Jupiter's Darling, Pal Joey, Kiss Me Kate. Quite a few. He was active for about 30 years in directing and producing.
Yeah, he was my guest one day on the air.
This is the Talking Archive. I'm Josh Jacobs. We're talking with Chuck Southcott. And next time we'll find out about his two favorite interviews.